Hello folks, and welcome to this WiseHowl tutorial on Power Automate Desktop, which I will refer to as Power Automate from this point onwards. Today we're going to look at the basics of using variables in Power Automate. We'll begin by learning what a variable actually is. Then we'll look at storing data in a variable, renaming our variables, using the values stored in variables. We'll also look at the variables pane for managing our variables. We'll look at performing calculations on variables, different variable data types, a list variable, a data table variable, and finally the set variable action. So, what exactly is a variable? Well, a quick search online came up with this description. A variable is a named storage location in a computer's memory that holds a value like a number or text, which can change as a program runs, acting like a labeled container for data that makes code reusable, readable, and dynamic. In more basic terms, I like to think of a variable as a small piece of memory that you assign a name to, and then you can hold data in that piece of memory. You can use the label for that memory to manipulate it. The data itself that you store can be a whole variety of different types of data, text, numbers, decimals. And whilst that data is in the memory, we can manipulate it to do whatever we want. Let's begin by creating a new flow. So I'm going to click on my new flow button and I'll type in a name for this new flow. I'm going to call it 01 storing data in variables and click the create button. So now my flow window opens and I need to begin. As always, I'm going to begin by adding a comment. So I'll move over to my search actions, begin to type the word comment. There's my comment action. I'll drag it onto the screen. So what is it I'm going to do? I'm going to ask the user to select a button. Click save. The next thing is to introduce the message action. So again, if I search in my search actions pane, I can see the display a message box. I'll drag this in. Title for the message box: button selection. And the message I'd like to display: please select a button. Now further down in the message box options, we can see your choice of buttons. I'd like to give them 3 to try. So I'm going to go for abort, retry, and ignore. Whichever button they decide to choose, down here at the bottom of the action, we can see the variable produced. And at the moment it's called button pressed. But as always with variables, you should rename them to something more suitable. So I'm going to click inside here and I'm going to call this user underscore button. Variables don't like spaces in Power Automate, so I'm going to use underscore in this case. Now I can click save. When I run this flow, whichever button the user selects will then be stored in that variable. I then want to show them on the screen what value they stored. So I'm going to add a comment to do this. I'm going to show you a cheeky little technique I like to use. Earlier in the flow, we added another comment. I'm going to copy and paste that comment and then drag it into position down here and edit it. This comment will say, show the user which button they clicked. And I'll click save. I simply like to use this shortcut of copying and pasting comments so that it means I don't have to then search in the actions again to drag a comment in. Now I need another message box to tell the user which button they clicked. So I'll drag in my message box action and I will call this one user result. And in my message, I'm going to say you clicked the, and this is where I need to include whatever's being stored in our variable. As you may already be aware, when we're using Power Automate, if we want to access variables within dialog boxes, we look for this X symbol. And when I hover the mouse, it says select variable. So if I click on this icon, I can see the user button variable from the previous display message action. And that's what I want to include. That should now show them the text from the button they selected. I'll just finish off this message with the word button. Down at the bottom, this message box will also produce a variable. But in this case, I don't want to store whichever button they pressed. So an important thing about variables in Power Automate is you don't always have to use them. For the first message box, I did want to store which button was clicked so that I could use it later. But in this case, the button that's pressed is irrelevant for me. So the main thing I can do is actually turn off this variable, which means that the button that's pressed for this message box won't be stored. Now I can click Save. So now we have our flow. In the first message box, we ask a user to select a button, and this is stored in a variable, which we gave an appropriate name to. And in the second message action, we show the value that's stored in that variable. So let's give it a run and see what happens. Move up to the top left corner, click on my Run button. So up pops the dialog box with a button selection. Please select a button. I'm going to click on the Retry button. And up pops the second message box. It tells me you clicked the Retry button. Excellent. Click OK. Let's try that again and see what happens if we click a different button. So I'll go up and click on Run for this flow. This time I'll choose the Abort button. And now the message box appears and tells me you clicked the Abort button. So it's definitely working. It's storing the value we click in the first message box and showing us that value in the second message box. I'll click OK. That then, folks, is the basic principle of a variable. An action creates a variable. We store a value in that variable. And then we use that stored value elsewhere in the flow. Just a few important points to make. Most actions in Power Automate will create at least one variable. Those of you already aware of variables may be thinking about something called scope, which I'll be dealing with in a later tutorial. But basically the scope of a variable within Power Automate is that it exists and can be used anywhere within a flow. Variables can and should be renamed whenever possible. When a flow ends, the value stored in a variable can be viewed. But when you run the flow again, those variables are cleared out completely, so anything stored is lost. Power Automate also assigns a data type to variables, and this is dependent on what value is actually being stored. So if I'm storing text, the data type will be a text. If I'm storing a date, the data type will be a date. A very useful tool for dealing with variables in Power Automate is the variables pane, which you'll find at the right hand side of your screen. If your variables pane does not appear, you can click the X symbol on the side, which causes it to toggle in and out. and I can see the section here that called flow. This is where my flow variables are stored, and we can see the variable we've used. I can tell the data type of this variable by the letter T. That tells me it's a text variable. I can see the name of it, and we renamed it as user_button. I can also see the value currently being stored in this variable, which is the word abort. There's also other things we can do. If I hover over the variable, I can see a symbol here that says mark as sensitive. So what does this mean? If you make a variable sensitive, it masks the content of that variable, preventing it from appearing in Flow Designer logs and the run history. This is probably best used for things like passwords where you don't want people to be able to see the contents. There's also a little drawing pin symbol. In this particular flow, we only have a single variable, but as you continue to create flows, you'll have lots and lots of variables, and there may be one that you refer to or use quite often during the flow. If I was to pin this variable, it would always appear at the top, unlike the standard convention, which is where they're listed alphabetically. We also have these three dots, more actions. I can view a variable. When you click on this, a box will appear. It will tell you the name of the variable, the data type of the variable, and what is currently being stored in the variable. Again, the word abort in our case. If I click close, go back to the more actions, we also have the ability to rename a variable. Interestingly, this will become quite useful. If you create flows and have forgotten to rename your variables at various points throughout the flow and then decide I should really rename them, we can click on this and we can rename our variable. Even though we named ours correctly in the first place, I am going to rename this one. So I'm going to rename this as which_button and then press enter. And one thing to notice, when you use the variables pane to rename your variables, it then renames them within your flow. I can see here on the first display message action, it's now called which button, and it's also renamed where we use that variable within the second display message. So this can be useful for renaming variables en masse. What else do we have? There's an option, find usages. If I give this a click, a pane will appear at the bottom of the page, and this will show me where that variable is being used. It will give you the line number and then a certain piece of text to describe where that's being used. Again, this can prove very useful with long flows and lots of variables. If I go back to my three dots, the other options, marker sensitive and pin, we've already seen. So that's your variables pane, folks. It's a really useful area for managing your variables. So that's our first flow dealing with variables. I'm now going to close this flow down and we can get ready to create another flow and look at performing calculations on variables. Let's click on the new flow icon and create a new flow. This will be 02 calculations on variables. Click create and up pops our flow window. So what I'd like to do in this one, folks, is ask the user for their date of birth and then using today's date, perform a calculation to calculate their age. And at the end, I'll display their age in a message box. So as always, I'm going to move up to my search actions. Type in the word, so begin to type in the word comment. Here's my comment action. Drag it onto my flow screen. So the first thing I want to do is ask a user for their date of birth. Click save. Now I need to add an action that will allow me to ask the user for a date. So if I go and search the actions, and I'll type in the word date, I look down the actions. In the message boxes section, there is a display select date dialog. Let's drag this in. This particular action allows me to ask the user for a date, and it will present them with a calendar so that they can actually select a date. The title for this, simply date of birth. The message I'd like to display, enter your date of birth. The other options that I have, I can decide whether I want a single date to be entered or maybe a range of dates, 2 dates. I can also store part of the time if I want to use to enter date and time. In this case, I'm only calculating age, so the time is irrelevant. I can also set a default value. In this case, I'm not going to bother. So down to the important things, variables produced at the bottom of the action. This particular action produces 2 variables. The first variable will be the date that the user enters or selects from the calendar. The second variable is a button that is associated with this box. As has been mentioned in the previous flow, with variables, we don't always have to store something in them. And in this particular instance, I don't need to know or store which button a user has pressed. So I can simply turn off this variable. This is going to make life easier in the future so that I'm not storing every single item from every single action. I'm only storing in variables the data I need to store. Back to our selected date variable, this is going to hold the user's date of birth. So I'm going to click inside the box to rename user underscore DOB and click save. And there's my display select date dialog box to ask the user for their date of birth. I'm now going to add a new comment using the technique I may have shown before, where I copy a previous comment and paste, and then I can drag this comment into its correct location, double click to edit. Now I want to get the current date. Click save. So now I need to get today's date or the current date for whenever this particular flow is being run so that I can subtract their date of birth from today's date. And luckily enough, because we've just done a search for any actions with the word date in them, I can see in my actions pane under the date time section, there's an option to get the current date and time. So I'll drag this action into my flow after the comment. Up at the top, I've got an option. Do I want the current date and time or just the current date? Current date in this case is perfectly fine. You do get some options about time zones. I just want my system's time zone, so I'll leave it as that. And again, we get variables produced at the bottom. So this will produce one variable, which is called the current date and time. I'm going to rename this variable to the word today and click save. Now that we have this action, I can perform a subtraction between today's date and the user's date of birth. I'm now going to add a comment to say what we're going to do next. I'm going to take one of my existing comments and copy and paste it, move it down here, double click to edit. The comment is calculate the difference between our stored dates and save. So how am I going to calculate the difference between 2 dates? Well, unlike numerical examples where we're using numbers, we could just do a straight subtraction. One thing minus another would give us a result. Not possible with dates, simply because of the nature of dates. I need to be able to calculate the difference between two given dates, and to do that in Power Automate, we have an action. Earlier during this section, I'd done a search for date in my actions pane, and in the date time section on the left, I can actually see there are two actions that deal with date calculations. There's one, add to date time. This allows you to take a specified date and add a period to that date to thus give you a date in the future or in the past. We also have, if I just hover the mouse here, subtract dates. This will find the difference between two given dates, and it says in days, hours, minutes and seconds. So this is what I need to use. I will select this action, drag it onto the screen. So the from date is my first choice. Well, the from date would be today's date. And don't forget, the variable we're actually storing in this case is a get current date and time action, which will always return the current date and time whenever this particular flow is run. So if I go to my variable selector, in here, I want today's date, and that's our variable called today. Quick double click and it inserts. The date I wish to subtract is the date of birth the user has entered. So again, I click into the box, my variable selector appears, click on the X, double click the user's date of birth. So this will subtract the user's date of birth from today's date. My last option, what do I want the difference in? Well, I'm hoping to show the difference in years, how old they are in years. But the only option I've got in here is seconds, minutes, hours and days is the biggest time interval that's available. So I'll accept days. Down at the bottom, variables produced. I open this section up. So this will produce a variable showing the difference between my two dates in days as time difference. I'm going to click on this variable to change the name, age underscore in underscore days. So the difference between our two dates will be shown in a variable and stored in a variable called age in days. Save. So this flow so far asks the user for their date of birth, which they enter using the calendar or typing the date of birth in. It will then go and find the current date and store it in a variable called today. And then it'll calculate the difference between those two dates in days. At this point, it's probably a good idea to test this flow by entering a date and see what result it gives. So if I move up to the top and click on my run icon, it's asking me to enter a date. Now you might notice that this particular date style that is shown in this dialog box, maybe not one we're used to. I'm used to the day / month / year. So when you're picking dates in here, it's not very easy just to type a date in that particular format. What I'm going to do is click on the little icon on the right, which exposes a calendar to me. And if I click on January 2026, it will then drill to 2026 as a whole year. If I click on 2026, you can now see that it's showing me a decade, 2020 to the end of 2029. And then I'm going to go back, back, back until I can see 1995. When I select the year, it then exposes the months. I'm going to pick October. I'm going to pick the 15th of October 1995. So this is the date I'm using as a user's date of birth. Click on OK, and the flow goes ahead, calculates the difference between the date I chose, 15th of the 10th, 1995, and today's date. If we now approach our variables pane on the right hand side, if you recall, this is a really useful area for us to see values being stored in variables. And even though this flow is executed from beginning to end, the values will still show in here. I can see the user's date of birth, the variable we created with the first select date dialog box, 15th of the 10th, 1995. I can see today's date, which at the time of recording is the 21st of January 2026. And I can see the difference in days, 11,056 days. Just a little note I'd like to make here about data types with variables. When you store dates in variables, they tend to show us the X symbol for a variable. When you store numbers, you will see this hash symbol. So this tells me that the difference in between these two dates is being shown as a numerical value. And that is Power Automate automatically deciding what data type it should be. But there we go, 11,056 days. But I have a problem. I'd like to show their age in years, not days. So how do I go about this? Well, there's kind of an industry standard way of taking number of days and converting it into years. We take the number of days and we divide them by 365.25. The 0.25 allows for the extra day every 4 years, leap years, and then that should give us an accurate age in years. So I need to do some form of division on this number 11,056. Also worth noting at this point, if I perform calculations on this particular numerical variable, it may return a number that has decimal places. So as an example, it may return 30.111 as a person's age. And I'm only really interested in the part in front of the decimal point. I'm only interested in the integer value of the calculation. So how do I go about doing this? Well, there are numerous methods I could use to do this. But as one example we're going to have a look at, if I move up to my search actions and I look for an action called truncate number. And if I go and hover my mouse, this will get the integral or fractional digits of a numerical value. What this basically means, folks, is that anything after the decimal point will be truncated or chopped off. So I only return the integer part of a numerical calculation. And that's what I want to do. So I'm going to drag this action in. What number do I want to truncate? Well, I don't want to truncate the age in days because I need to perform a calculation on it. And this is where we introduce the idea of how most kind of numerical calculations certainly are performed on variables in Power Automate. I go and pick the variable age in days. That's the number I want to truncate, but it isn't the 11,000 I want to truncate. I want to take this number and divide it by 365.25, as mentioned earlier. So when you want to perform numerical calculations on variables, it's very clever what we can do in Power Automate. I click inside the percentage symbol, so just after the S and before the percentage symbol, I can simply perform the calculation within the variable itself. So I'm going to put divide 365.25. If you have a value in a variable and you want to perform calculations on it, you can perform that calculation inside the percentage symbols of a variable. Basically, we think of the percentage symbols as marking the beginning and end of a variable. And I can then just do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division in this case. It doesn't matter. We can perform any kind of numerical calculations on a variable within the percentage symbols, and that is what will be returned. The operation it's asking me about down here is, do I want the integer part, the decimal part, or do I want to round up or round down that particular number? Well, in our case, I just need the integer part of the result of our previous calculation in the previous step. So I'll leave it as integer part. And this in itself will produce a variable, the truncated value. I click into this, I'm going to call this age underscore in underscore years and click save. So what this should do, folks, is you should take the subtracted value, in this example 11,056, divide it by 365.25 and store it in a new variable called age in years. That calculation will only return the integer part of the result, which will just be their whole number. Let's give this another try and see what happens. If I go up to the top, click on run. So it's asking for a date again. I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did earlier and choose exactly the same date. So if I go and look for 1995, October 15th, there we go. Click OK. This now runs through the flow, performs the calculation. If I go and look in my variables pane on the right hand side, I can see the age in days is still the 11,056, so it's done exactly the same thing it did on the previous occasion we ran this. But now I can see a new variable. It's a numerical variable. I can tell by the hash symbol, and it's showing age in years 30. Well, if somebody was born in 1995, we're currently in 2026, at some point this year they will turn 31, but at the moment, because they were born in October, this person is 30 years old. So I can now see that the flow is doing exactly what I wanted it to do. Here you can see some examples of typical numerical calculations that Power Automate will accept. We can take a variable and we can perform multiplication, addition, subtraction, division. You can perform calculations on multiple variables. So in this table you can see I'm adding variable 1 to variable 2, which in itself will return the answer of the addition. And you can also, as with most calculations, control the order within which your calculation is performed with the use of brackets. So in this bottom example, it'll take the value stored in the variable called VAR, increase it by 5, and the result of that will then be multiplied by 10. So just some examples of typical standard calculations you can happily perform, remembering, of course, the calculation must be within the percentage symbols of the variable. The final thing to do with this flow would be to show the user's age as we calculated it in a message. So I'm going to click on my comment from earlier, quick Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste, and then I'll take my copied version after the actions, double click to edit it. I want to show the age in a message. Click save. Then I'm going to go up to my search actions section, type in the partial word of message. I can see my display message action, drag that into my flow. Title of this, user age, now to the message to display. So I want to say something along the lines of you are value years old. But for the first example, I'm going to do something a little different. We've just discovered that we can perform calculations on variables within the percentage symbols in various different actions. Wherever we use a variable, we can perform a calculation on it. So in this instance, I'm going to put into my message, you are, and then I'm going to go to my variable selection icon. And rather than choosing the age in years, which we've just calculated, I'm actually going to choose the age in days variable. And inside that variable, I'm going to perform the calculation we did earlier. I'm going to take this value divided by 365.25. When we did this earlier, we used the truncate action to only show the integer part of the result of this calculation. I want to demonstrate what happens if I try to shortcut that method and just perform the calculation within the message itself. So this will work just like the previous calculation, except it'll now be concatenated into a string. I'm going to click after the variable. So this will say you are, perform the calculation, return a number, years old. For the other action, for the other options within the action, I'm just going to set this as an information. The buttons chosen doesn't matter in this case. Down at the bottom, variables produced. Well, this will produce standard button variables. I'm not going to do anything with these, so I'll simply turn them off and click save. So let's see what happens in this particular instance. I go to the top, I click on run. Just as before, I'm going to use the same date, 15th of October 1995, just to keep it nice and consistent. 1995, October 15th. And say OK. And up pops our message. You are 30.26967, so on and so on and so on. So this demonstrates that, for example, in a message dialog, we can still perform the same calculation wherever you're using or quoting variables. You can still perform the same calculations inside them and it will return answers. The particular issue in this case is that I really don't want all the numbers after the decimal place. So I'm going to click OK. Previously, within this particular flow, we used the truncate number action so that it only showed the integer part of the calculation we've just seen. So I'm now going to go back to my display message action, give it a double click to edit, and if I delete the variable we used along with the calculation we performed, and instead this time I click on the select variable icon and I choose the age in years variable. This is the one we truncated in the previous action. Click on save. Now give this a run. Let's see the result. As before, very quickly find 15th of October 1995. Say OK. This time I get the integer value, the whole number. And this simply says you are 30 years old. Click OK. Now I'd like to have a look at variable data types, and we're going to deal with the main three, which would be numbers, text and dates. There are other data types, but they're the main three I want to deal with. And we're also going to have a look at an action called set variable. So to begin with, I'm going to have a look at number variables. If I go up to the top left of my Power Automate screen, having saved the last flow that we did, I want a new flow. 03 number variables and click create. So we're back at our flow screen, and the first thing I want to do is create a variable and set its value to a number. So I'm going to click into my search actions. I'm going to add the comment action, and I want to create a new variable and set its value. Save. As discussed previously in this tutorial, a number of actions within Power Automate automatically create variables themselves, and we've manipulated their values and changed their values and used those values. But what if I just want to create a variable and assign a number to it? Well, in my search actions, if I type the word set, you'll see within the variable section there's an action called set variable. This allows you to set the value of a new or existing variable, create a new variable, or even overwrite a previously created variable. all of which we'll have a look at. Let's drag this into my flow. So up at the top, it wants a name for this variable. I'm going to call this my underscore number. And I want to assign a value to this variable. In this case, I'm just going to assign a number, the number 10, and click Save. This may seem relatively basic, but if I go up to the top and run this flow, we can see on the right hand side in the variables pane, my variable my number has the value 10 stored in it. More importantly, if I look at the icon, it is the hash icon, which denotes a numerical value. So that's what set variable is used for. It can be used, as mentioned, to create and set values, change values, update values. There are certain specific actions connected to dealing with variable values that are numbers. For example, I can increase a variable by a given amount, or I can decrease a variable by a given amount. So let's have a look at these. I'm going to copy and paste my comment from earlier, drag it down after this one, and if I double click to edit, I would like to increase the existing variable value by 10. Save. If I go to my search actions and I type in the word increase, you'll see there's an action to increase a variable. So I'll drag that into my flow. The variable I'd like to increase is the one we already have, my number, and I would like to increase it by 10. Click Save. I can also decrease a variable. So let's copy my previous comment again, pull it down to the right place, double click to edit. This time I would like to decrease the existing variable value, but this time I'll decrease it by 5. So if I go to my search actions and I type in the word decrease, I can see the action to decrease a variable. I shall put that one in. The variable this time, my number again, and I'd like to decrease that by 5. Click Save. Something else I can use set variable for is to replace the value currently stored in a variable with a completely different value. So let's copy a comment and move it down, double click to edit. This time I would like to replace the existing variable value with another value and click Save. So I'm going to go back up to my search actions, type the word set and bring in my set variable action. By default, the set variable action is assuming I'm going to create a new variable. So if I go up to the top section here where it's got this new variable it's going to create, if I click, we can see the variable picker, because in this instance I don't want a new variable, I just want to replace the value of the existing variable. So if I click on the drop down, I can find my number, this is our existing variable, and in the value, whatever is currently stored in the my number variable, when it reaches this point in the flow, it will replace that value with the number 30. Click Save. So we can use set variable to replace the existing values. We can also use set variable to perform calculations on variables. So let's copy and paste a previous comment, bring it down, double click to edit. So this time I would like to perform calculations on a variable, a variable value. So again, I'm going to bring in my set variable action. As with the previous one, it's not a new variable I want, it's to manipulate the existing variable. So I will click on here, find my number variable. What I'd like to do is take whatever's stored in the current variable my number, divide it by 2, and use the result of that to replace what's in the existing variable. So for the value, if I click on the variable icon in the top right corner, here's my number variable, and I'd just like to take that number, divide it by 2, and store it back in the my number variable. As we saw in the previous section, if I want to perform a calculation on this, I click inside the percentage symbols, and I'm simply going to divide by 2. Click Save. So in this case, I can perform various calculations on variables to create new variables or replace existing variables with the result of a calculation. One last example I'd like to have a look at. So if I copy and paste this comment, drag it down to the bottom, the last thing for this particular flow I'd like to have a look at is create a new variable using the value of an existing variable. So I want to create a brand new variable that is going to take the number currently being stored in the my number variable and multiply it by 100. So if I save this comment, for one last time, drag in the set variable towards the bottom. This is going to create a brand new variable this time, but I'm not going to keep that name. This will be new underscore number and into my value. So the value of this new variable is going to be the value currently stored in the existing variable multiplied by 100. So I click on the variable selector. There's the my number variable, and inside here, within the percentage symbols, I'd just like to take that value and multiply it by 100. Save. This one demonstrates that you can create new variables using the value of existing variables, which is always a useful technique. Now folks, one thing I'd like to do next is introduce a new method of running flows. If I was to run this flow from beginning to end now, I would end up with whatever the final value is in the my number variable after all the various actions have been performed. And I would also have this new number variable we've just created, which will contain the other number in the my number variable multiplied by 100. But I'd only see the end product. So another way of running flows, if I move up towards the top, you can see an icon here that if I hover, it says run action by action. In some languages, programming languages, this would be called step through. What it allows me to do is perform each action in turn, and I control when that action is activated or not activated. So if I click this, as we begin the flow, you can see the very top action is highlighted. I should point out it is worth noticing that the comments won't highlight during this section. Comments are non-actionable code, so it doesn't highlight them at all. So yes, at the moment, number 2, line 2, set variable. On the right hand side of my variables pane, I can see the my number variable, and I can also see the new number variable, and they're both currently empty. If I now click on run next action, that will perform the action that was currently highlighted in blue and move down to the next action, ready to perform that one. At this point though, if I have a quick look in my variable on the right, I can see in the myNumber variable the number 10 has been stored. It's exactly what the previous action did. When I click Run Next Action now, it should increase that value by 10. So let's run the next action. And again, if I observe on the right, the myNumber variable now contains the number 20. When I click Run Next Action again, it should decrease that variable value by 5. So let's go and do that. Run Next Action. I can now see that my number variable has decreased by 5. The next thing I wanted to do was take whatever number was currently being stored and completely replace it with the number 30. So let's run Next Action and again move to the right to observe. Now I can see the number 30 is being stored. So we can replace existing values with new values. The next thing I wanted to do in my flow was take the number that's stored, currently the number 30, and divide it by the number 2. So half that value. If I run Next Action, I can see in the myNumber variable now that's currently storing the number 15, half of the number 30 that we set earlier. And finally, I wanted to create a brand new variable that uses the value from the previous variable. At the moment, my new number variable has no value, or it has a value of 0 at this point. If I run the next action, first thing to notice, the highlighting has now stopped. We've finished the last action, so that's where the flow actually ends. And on the right hand side, I can see that it has taken the myNumber variable with a value of 15 and multiplied it by 100 to get 1500. So two things to note there, folks. Firstly, the new technique of running your flows. Next action, next action, next action. As each one is highlighted, you click the next action button and that particular command is then performed. It really helps us to see stage by stage what is happening within our flow. Also, second thing to notice, we can just manipulate number variables in a variety of ways using the set variable action. So here we are back at the main flow screen. We're going to create a new flow now to have a look at date variables. So I'll go up to the top, new flow, 04 date variables. Create. So what I'd like to do here is use the set variable we've just used previously to set a date, and then just show you a couple of functions that we can perform on date variables. First thing I'm going to do, add a comment. So if I search for the comment action, drag the comment in, I'm going to say create a new variable. A new variable and store a date in it. I'm going to put in brackets here, kind of, with a question mark, and you'll see why in a few minutes. Click on save. Then I'll need my set variable. So there's my set variable action. Drag this in. This new variable, I'm going to rename this as my date. And I'm going to type a value in for this date. I'm going to say 26th of the 9th, 1995. And click save. So this will create a new variable called my date, and it'll store the value 26th of the 9th, 1995 in it. Now before I do anything else, we're going to have a quick run of this flow. So if I go up to the top and click my run button, and then go over to the right hand side in the variables pane, I can see the my date variable, but interestingly, the icon for this is the T, which says it's text. When you use the set variable, it will have a look at the data that's there, but it makes the assumption that what you've entered is text. So if I now wanted to perform various calculations on this, it could possibly cause an issue. So what we have is, if I do a quick search in my actions the word convert. I'll stretch this pane out a second. Under the text section, there's a whole series of actions for converting text to numbers, numbers to text. And we can see here there's one that converts text to a date time. So that'll take a text value and convert it to a date time. I'm going to drag this in. The text I want to convert is what I'm storing in the myDate variable. There is an option here to represent the date in a custom format, but I'm not going to bother with that. And this action in itself produces a variable. So if I go down here, I'm going to rename this my underscore new underscore date and click save. Let's run it again and see what happens. If I run my flow, I can see now when I go over to the right hand side, the original set variable, my date, has the 26th of the 9th, 1995, but that is being treated as a text data type. Whereas the new variable that's been converted to a date time data type has the date time icon, which if you remember from earlier, is just kind of the variable symbol, the X symbol. So this is now being stored as an official date. Interestingly, when I've used this in the past, I have used things like set variable and then gone on to perform calculations on dates, and it's worked perfectly fine. So that kind of begs the question, why do I need to convert it? One main reason I would suggest is that when dates are entered, they're often entered in different formats. Or, as you'll see in future tutorials, we may pull data from an Excel spreadsheet or a SQL database where the date may be in a different format. By using the convert text to date time action, one, it will automatically make sure the value being held in the variable is indeed being treated as a date time value. Secondly, if a date has been entered in an incorrect format or an unrecognized format by Power Automate, when you attempt to convert it, you will get an error message. So this will go some way into kind of error checking what's been entered and validating it to make sure it's a valid data type required. Now, sadly, I forgot to add a comment. So I'm going to copy and paste my previous comment, drag it between the set variable and the conversion actions, quick double click. So what did we do here? We converted the text data type date to an official date data type and save. So that's something I would always recommend. If you're dealing with dates, make sure that the data type of it is a date data type. As I mentioned, you may find from time to time that other functions, other actions you perform work perfectly fine, but it's always safe to do so. So the next two actions I want to have a look at. I want to have a look at a function that allows us to add to a date time. So I can specify a date and I can add a period to that date. So if I go up to my actions, I type in the word date, we can see in the date time section, there isn't very many actions we've got, but there is one here, add to date time. I'm going to drag that one in. The date time I want to add to is the new one that we've converted, not the original one. Let's give that a quick double click. What do I want to add to this? Well, I'm going to add a period or an interval of 10. The question is 10 what? So down at the bottom you get a time unit which allows you to choose hours, minutes, days, months, years, whatever the case may be. I'm going to add days to this, and this will produce a new variable itself. So this will be date underscore 10 underscore days underscore ahead. So it's whatever date we've got 10 days ahead. Click save. Oops, yet again, forgot to add my comment. So I will copy and paste, drag this down, double click to edit. We want to add 10 days to our date and save. And this time I won't forget. Copy and paste. Pull this down. And with this one, I want to subtract 10 days from our date. So I'm going to drag my add to date time. I want to go back to the original my date rather than the one we just added 10 days to, which is here. I want to go back to the my new date, the converted date time. And how do we subtract days? Well, strangely enough, we just make the value negative. So if I say minus 10 days, down at the bottom, here's my variable. I'm going to rename this variable date underscore 10 underscore days underscore behind, and click save. So the idea of this, folks, is we're using the set variable again to specify a value, which we now know will be stored as a text data type. This can cause problems when you're dealing with certain actions that manipulate dates. It can also be an issue from time to time when you're bringing dates in from outside sources where they're in strange, peculiar formats. So we then run it through the convert text to date time action, which will then give us a recognized standard Microsoft date format. And from that point onwards, it can be treated as a date. We then take the action to add 10 days to this to tell us what the date would be in 10 days time. And then we add another action to subtract 10 days to tell us what 10 days was before the date we specified. Let's give this a run, see what we get. So if I go up to the top, click on run, quickly flew through that. So I can see the original set variable action where we specified a date as the 26th of September 1995 being stored as a text value. We then converted this, my new date. It's got the correct data type symbol that we want, 26th of the 9th, 1995. Then if I look at this one, I just hover over this is the date 10 days ahead. So 6th of October looks reasonable. And this one, if I just hover over this one, this is the variable 10 days behind, which is 10 days behind in September. Both of these variables have the correct data type specified, the X symbol for a date. So it's done exactly what we want to. That's just manipulating date variables. So here we are again, back at the main flow screen. And the last data type we're going to have a look at is text. So I'll create a new flow, 05 text variables, and create. So what we're going to do this time? Well, we'll use the set variable to create a new variable and we'll store some text in it. Then we'll have a look at a variety of actions that can be performed on this variable. So if I search in my search actions, comment, drag my comment in, I want to create, move my mouse out of the way, a new variable and store text in it. Click save. Now I'll go and get my set variable. Says my set variable action. Drag this in. Let's rename this my underscore text. What value should I put in this? Well, for the example I'm going to do with text, it involves splitting text apart. A very common use of this is when you have somebody's name. So I'm going to put the name Paul Jones. Save. So this will create a variable called myText, and it will store the text Paul Jones in it. Going to copy and paste my comment, drag it underneath set variable, double click to edit. What do I want to do? I want to manipulate the text and save. If I go to my search action section and I type in the word text, there's a whole variety of actions, but as I scroll down the list, make my pane bigger, in the text section there's a whole set of actions I can perform on text. I can append a line to text, I can get some subtext or part of the text, crop text, I can pad it out, trim text. See, there's a whole selection of options we can do with text. Rather than going through these, I'm sure this will be a subject of a future WiseOwl tutorial, I'm going to choose the split text and drag this action in. First thing it's asking for, what text do you want to split? If I go over to my variable selector, my text, the value being stored in that variable. Delimiter type. You can have standard delimiters, things like commas, hyphens, spaces. You can have custom delimiters, basically any character, or you can specify a number of characters. In our case, I'm going to stick with the standard one. Your standard list is a space or a tab or a new line. In my case, it's going to be the space between the word Paul and the space between the word Jones. How many times do I want to split it in this piece of text? Well, I only want to split it once because there's just a space between the first name and the last name. And this will produce its own variable, which I will call separated underscore text. Click save. So let's see what this does. If I run my flow over towards the right hand side, I can see the original set variable, my text, the value of Paul Jones. It's got the T for text data type. Then underneath this, I can see my variable called separated text. And this is an icon we've not come across yet. We're going to be looking at this in more detail in a few minutes, but this is called a list variable. If I go to the three dots at the right hand side of this variable and I view it, I can see now that the name Paul Jones has been split into two separate values, one called Paul, one called Jones. And this is a list of text variables. This is what this particular action does. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at the list variable very soon. Click close. So there you go, folks. When you're dealing with variable data types, there are certain things to be aware of. And using the set variable action allows you to create new variables, set those variables, as we've seen in previous sections, change what's stored in a variable, and so on. I'm back at the main flow screen and we've just got two more variable data types to have a look at. I'm going to look at these quite quickly because they are slightly more advanced variables and they will be dealt with within their own WiseOwl tutorials at some point in the future. The first of these, I'm going to create a new flow, 06 list data type, and click create. First thing I'm going to do, folks, is add a comment, drag my comment in, create a list variable, save. If I go to my search actions, I type the word list. Under the variables category, you can see there's mentions of lots of items for lists. There's a clear list action, sort list action, shuffle a list action. The thing I want to do down at the very bottom is create a new list. So I shall drag this in. This in itself just produces a variable. So what do I want to name this variable? I want to name it shopping underscore list and save. So this in itself, this action, will just create a new list which is stored as a variable called shopping list. The next thing I want to do is add something to this list. So I'm going to copy my previous comment, pull it underneath here, double click to edit, add items to the list and save. Over on the right hand side in my actions pane, I can see the add item to list action. So I shall drag this one in. What item would I like to add? Well, let's pretend we're baking a cake. So I will need some eggs. And here it's asking into list. Go to my variable selector. There's my list variable shopping list. Give it a double click and save. Now I'm just going to add a few more items to this. So I'm going to use a cheat method. I'm going to make sure that last action was selected. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And I'll do this 3 more times. Then I can go to each one and edit them. It simply saves having to drag actions in each time. And it's only one item that's going to change, which is the actual item I add to the list. So if I go to the second add item to list action, give it a double click. If I'm needing eggs, I'm going to need flour, save. Double click the third. I'm going to need some sugar, save. And then the last one, give it a quick double click to edit. I'm going to need water and save. Pretty uninspiring cake, but eggs, flour, sugar, water. Let's see what happens. If I give this a run. Seems to have worked. I go over to the right hand side. I can see my shopping list variable. I can see the icon that denotes this is a list. You can view the values being stored here. And what you'll notice is it stores them separated by commas. For some of you, you may be aware of something called an array. And this is exactly how arrays are stored, values separated by commas. And that's kind of what Power Automate is doing. If I go to the 3 dots on the right hand side and view this variable, we can now see that they're contained as a single column of data called item. Each item, eggs, flour, sugar, water, is stored as a list. So this is what the list variable does. It stores items as a single column with values in that column. In future tutorials, you will learn how we can reference these items using these numbers on the left-hand side. They're referred to as an index number. So item 0, item 1, 2, 3. And we can manipulate and use these items. And as I say, you will see this in a future WiseOwl tutorial. For now, I'm just going to close. So that is the list variable. The second of these more advanced data types is called a data table. So I'm going to create a flow to have a look at a data table variable. I click on New Flow, 07 data table variable, create. And we're back at our main flow screen. So what do I want to do? I want to launch Excel and open a particular file. If I minimize my Power Automate down, you can see on the desktop of this computer, I have an Excel file called movies. I give this a quick double click to open. You can see it's a whole myriad of movie data. Things like the title, release date. There are numerous columns and numerous rows. I want to pull this data and hold it in a variable in Power Automate. So if I close my Excel, go back to my Power Automate, going to add a comment. First thing I need to do, open Excel and a specific file. Save. I'll go up to my search actions and I'll type the word Excel. There's a whole list of actions connected to Excel. Towards the bottom I can see the Launch Excel action. I'll drag this in. My first choice, do I want to launch Excel with a blank document or a particular document? And in this case, that's what I want. I now get a choice for this document's path. To browse to this path, there's a little icon just over here to the right. If I hover, it says select file, looks like a piece of paper with an arrow on it. Give that a click. If I navigate to the desktop where this movies file is, that's the file I want it to open. The other options here, make instance visible. You can open Excel hidden in the background, but in this case, I'm quite happy for it to open. I could open it as read only, but I don't really need to in this case. And there is a set of advanced options which will be looked at in more detail in future tutorials. When you open Excel, it actually opens what's called an instance of Excel. And I can name this instance should I choose to. For this example, I really don't need to do this. So I'm going to click on Save. So that action will open Excel and it'll open a particular file. Now I want to read the contents of that file. So if I copy and paste my comment, drag it underneath, double click to edit, read the contents into a variable and save. So let's go and have a look at my actions for Excel. And I can see there's an action, read from Excel worksheet. Exactly what I want to do. So I shall pull that in. First option is which instance of Excel do I wish to use. In our case, we only have one instance open, but it is possible you may have multiple instances of Excel and you would have named them. Next question, what do I want to retrieve? Well, there's lots of options here. I can go for a single cell, a range of cells, a selection, all the available values from a worksheet, or the value of named cells if you used named ranges. In my case, I just want all the available values from a particular sheet. Again, just like before, there are more advanced options we can use with this, but they'll be covered in more detail. And the variable it produces will be called Excel data. I'm going to change the name of this particular variable to movies_data. This is going to be the actual data it retrieves from Excel, and this will be held in our variable. Click Save. Last thing I want to do, close down Excel. There's no reason for it to be open any further. I've read the data I want, and I can now do whatever I want to, manipulate that data. So I'll copy and paste my comment again, drag it underneath, and I'll simply say close Excel and save. Back over in our actions pane, I can see the close Excel action, drag it in. It's the Excel instance I want to close, and I have a few choices. I can close without saving the document, or I can save the document, or I can do a save as on the document. In this particular example, I'm just retrieving the data from Excel, so I don't need to save. I can click the save icon, and there's my action in the flow. Now let's test and see what happens. If I run this flow, Excel will open, it'll read the contents, and then it will close. Flow finished. Let's go over to the right hand side in our variables pane. Firstly, you'll notice the variable Excel instance. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you have multiple instances of Excel open, and that's why they're held as variables, because you may wish to manipulate different Excel instances within your flow. More importantly for us, the second variable here called movies data. If I hover over the movies data, I can see the icon for this is kind of a grid symbol or a table symbol. This is a different kind of variable than we've seen so far. Just to the right of this, 3,401 rows of data and 18 columns of data. So let's have a look. If I go to my three dots on the right, give it a click, click View, and here's my data table. I can see all the various columns across the top, and I can scroll across. So 18 columns of data. And then on the left-hand side, I can see each row. And there was 3,400 of those rows. All of this data is now stored in a variable called movies data, which has the data type of a data table. In future WiseOwl tutorials, we'll do lots of work with this where we can manipulate this data and perform a whole variety of actions. But this is just a basic tutorial, so I'm going to close. So that's your data table variable. Very, very useful. So there you go, folks, a WiseOwl tutorial on the basics of variables in Power Automate. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you next time.